So, good morning and welcome to EMRC webinar series, Powering Up. Thanks for joining us today. Our focus today is the performance of the power sector since 2013 and the road ahead under the new administration that is barely 4 days old. The expectation really is not to produce a scorecard of the performance of NESE under the last administration, but to sort of highlight critical issues that have persisted, why they have remained like unmovable logs of wood, and perhaps suggestions as to how they can be tackled to attract much needed investment, strengthen the network, improve supply and customer service. With me to have this discussion today are three distinguished industry stakeholders, and I'd like to start by introducing Kolapo Joseph. Kolapo Joseph is an astute investment banker and financial services expert with extensive industry experience. He's the Chief Corporate Finance and Corporate Development Officer at North South Power Company. In 2013, North South Power won the concession to manage and operate the Shiroro hydroelectric power plant for a period of 30 years. It supplies about 8% of total on-grid generation today. Going to Ugo Obichukwu. He is the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Ikeja Electric. He has led several projects and initiatives, including digital transformation, that have helped Ikeja Electric become the industry leader it is today. Before being the the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Ikeja Electric, he was also the Chief Commercial Officer. Last on our panel is Onyinye Anene Nzelu. She's the head of mini grids at Onji Energy Access, where she manages the financing and development of multi-million-dollar portfolios of mini grid projects for rural electrification. She has been awarded for her excellence and resilience by several international organizations, including the Association of Energy Engineers and the Florence School of Regulation. She is the first female certified energy manager in Nigeria. Kolapo, Ugo, and Onyinye, thank you so much for joining us today with our Powering Up series. Just to give a background before I get into the question, I invite you, the question I would like to start off really is about the privatization. In 2005, EPSRA was enacted with the goal of creating a competitive electricity market designed to be in 3 stages: pre-transition, the transitional electricity market where we are today, the medium term, which is essentially characterized by full retail competition. At that point, you and I, our customers, will be able to choose who actually we get our supply of electricity from. To that end, privatization happened in 2013. And there are so many expectations from that exercise. Key expectations were attracting significant private capital, of course, because at the time it was under government and there was a lack of not just capacity, but the need to attract capital to reduce the losses and optimize revenue. Other expectations included increased levels of generation and supply, significant reduction of losses, categorized as technical, commercial, and collection losses. Obviously, the expectation was to also have at least 90 to 100% customer metering. And with the investments that were supposed to come in, the expectation was to have a robust network system, both at the transmission and the distribution end, to enhance reliability. But today, where we are, your guess is as good as mine in terms of if these expectations have been met. So what I would like to hear from each panelist is your general thoughts on the privatization in power. We could stay all morning, all day talking about the negatives, which have been discussed, that we keep discussing in different fora. What I would like to hear from you is some positives. What are the positives we can take out from the privatization exercise it could be lessons learned, it could be, building blocks to the promised land of 24/7 electricity, where everybody is happy and, demand and supply matches and all that. So let me start with you, Kolapo. Let's hear your thoughts on this whole exercise and the outcome of it.
All right, thank you, Rahila, and pleasure being here with Ugo and Oye. Going straight into the question, I think one of the things, to give context to some of the issues, we all need to agree that when they came up with the roadmap, a lot of things were not emphasized, like the dollar, the macro issues were not emphasized, the GDP issues, the constraints in the general economy. That's one. On the other hand, we took a lot of the imported narratives of how it would be done in a different country, society here. And I always tell people, you need to look at the context of your own country and localize your own issues. I'll give you an example I've always had a challenge with. Why would tariffs be higher in the north when poverty levels are higher, the economic activities are lower? But because of the way we imported it, the way we compute our ATC and loss, ATC and losses as a component of the tariff, it's higher there. But that's just an example of what I mean things. But in my view, they've been building blocks. They've been learnings. So, they had this big plan. They understand now to actually deliver it, to be pragmatic about it. They've seen the constraints. And that's why some of the things I think they've come up with, which I do give, which my view, you may not see the megawatts, but you have to acknowledge that some of these things have helped to sustain the industry, right? And I think one is I'm sure Ugo also agree with me, I think the band tariff structure. Because if you look at it, we know not everyone can afford 24 hours power. It's a sad reality, right? But that's where it is. And then the way to fix it is, okay, let me give you 12 hours per day and you get a lower tariff and things like that. And then it begins to make sense. And if you see, a lot of customers now will tell you, well, I'm in band A, I'm meant to get 18 hours or so, or 24 hours of light, and you have not given me that. So I shouldn't pay this tariff. So you begin to see people begin to have this healthy debate with the distribution companies on what their expectations is on supply versus the tariff they are paying. I think another one would be the bilateral contracting they've introduced. I think I've always been a member of Adam Smith in Invisible Hand, economics, where he said invisible hand, people will move, general demand and supply will fall into where people's best interests are best served. And that invisible hand controls the whole economic activities. I think when we gradually move towards bilaterally contracting, and discos know that there's no embed that would allow them accumulate losses and without going after their assets and things like that, and also they have the freedom to increase the tariff, which Ugo will confirm, but I think they've been doing that of recent, because at least in Abuja, we see our tariffs going up every now and then. It's not announced anymore, but it's being done, implemented. So there's no more that argument anymore, really. And the last point, I think, looking at it from a generational perspective, again, the Adam Smith philosophy and principle, I think, is the legible customer. I know there's a huge debate about it. NEC released some guidelines. Ugo is laughing already. But I think the reality is that it has made the discos improve their customer service, spend more time looking at their MD customer base, which they neglected. And if you realize, some of them have even, especially Kaja Disco, have gone into premium customer, which is, I really support that. Premium, selling lights to customers at a premium. That's the way the market should be, and providing them additional service or guarantees or so on and so forth. That's where the market should be, and that's where I see that gradually getting there. And for me, that gives me a lot of hope that things are getting better, because once you liberalize the market and people are competing, over time, tariffs will come down. Over time, service will improve, and over time, customers will have more rights and be able to challenge the system. I think those are some few points for me to know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kolapo. So Ugo, over to you. I want to see you disagree with some points Kolapo has made, but you tell me what your thoughts are. I mean, again, I would like to, there's so much negativity. I want us to talk about the positives, and I like what Kolapo has talked about. A lot of people always tend to look at, we don't have megawatts, we are 4,000, there's no network capacity. But when you look at it from some of the points that Kolapo has mentioned here, they actually are the building blocks to get into where we want to. So Ugo, please, let's hear from you now.
So thank you, Rahila, and thanks to everyone who have joined this session. And of course, nice to be here with Kolapo and Onyinye as well. Just to bust your bubbles, so sorry to bust your bubbles. I think Kolapo and I agree more than we disagree. So
that's good. Excellent, yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, so it's been a journey. I think November makes it 10 years since privatization of the power sector. Of course, the Buhari administration handled 8 years of that 10 years, and their own era is gone now. We're in a new one. And I think there's a lot of positives that one can take out, as much as, I mean, when you look at the KPIs that were set back then, we probably haven't achieved, most of them. But I think a lot of people will agree that there has been positive, and Kolapo did reel up some, and I think I also have some as well. There were a lot of intervention funds. So at least the government put your money where the mouth is at some point. Some people might disagree and say, look, maybe that wasn't enough. But I think the government did provide some kind of financial support. We did also see partnerships outside Nigeria, whether it's with governments or with institutional investors or the likes of the World Bank, and trying to get them to also support the power sector, the local power sector. Support from the World Bank, like I mentioned. I think there was also the Siemens deal. Unfortunately, that didn't go as planned, but at least you would want to put that in the column of the government as some of the efforts that they've put that they did put in, or some of the initiatives they did put forward to try and solve some of the issues in the power sector. And then, of course, I also agree there were a lot of there were tariff adjustments, albeit they came quite late. But then I think they found a way around it. I think the first 5 or 6 years was really figuring out how to constantly increase tariff in tandem with realities. I think the government struggled with that for some time, but at least they were towards the tail end of the administration, I think it was clearly understood that, look, there are just some things that you can't wait, or you can't kick that can down the road. So we have seen adjustments happen as they were meant to be. If you recall, Raila, there was always meant to be a minor tariff review, I think, twice a year. And there were years that was frozen for 2-3 years. And I mean, that caused a lot of damage in the market structure. But towards the tail end of this administration, we've seen that they sort of have fixed that. So tariff adjustments are happening frequently, maybe not as frequently as some of us might want, but at least frequently. And then, of course, in the area of metering as well, we did see, government interventions and actions in the area of metering, whether it's via MAP or whether it's via phase 0 and phase 1, of course, with the support of the CBN. So that was also huge. We got a lot more people metered. I do remember coming into Ikeja Electric, I think the metering density was somewhere around 30-40%, if I'm not mistaken, but we've seen it, grow to over almost 70% today. And that's also because of a lot of the initiatives of the government. So pressure was on DISCOs as well to make sure that they improve customer metering, and DISCOs also took that as an important initiative of theirs as well. And so metering density has increased. I think these days you hear less of, at least down here in Lagos, you hear less of estimated billing like you used to maybe 8 years ago. So that I think was also a positive. And of course, speaking to estimated billing as well, we've seen a lot of reforms in that area, whether it's the largely unpopular capping methodology that it's very unpopular with DISCOs, but maybe perhaps popular with consumers. I think the government will want to put that in their column as something that they were able to achieve, even though some of us don't agree with that methodology, but at least that's, trying to do something to ensure that there is some accountability with how customers are built. And of course, there are also other initiatives, like I mentioned, there's MAP, there's SBT, there's mini grid regulations. It's a number of initiatives from NERC themselves. And then lastly, Rahila, I think one thing that people also need to realize is there was a lot of capacity building over the last 8 years. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, people like Onyinye wouldn't be here, right? A lot of young people came through. Yeah, I mean, and so we have young engineers, young smart engineers today in the sector who you're pretty sure at the next phase of individuals that will manage Nigeria's power sector, and you're confident that the power sector is in the right hands once the baton has been passed. So that is also something very important. And then lastly for me is also renewables and a lot of the efforts of the regulators to encourage power generation outside of the grid. I think they did push that a lot over the last 3 years. Like I said, it started slow, but in the last 3 years, I think you've seen a lot of efforts by NERC to make sure that power is not just generated at the grid level, but also generated outside the grid. So a lot of positives. I mean, there are so many things, but we don't want to wear down on negatives, because I'm sure we all know.
I mean, it's quite interesting, when you hear, and that's the beauty of, when we talk about, count your blessings, when there are things going wrong, and you begin to count your blessings, you now realize, wait a minute, it's not that bad. So I've just heard you, Kolako speak, you talking, and like, wow, we have come a long way as an industry. I mean, it's 10 years. Yes, we don't have 24/7 power supply. The network is not as strengthened as we can. But one of the things you mentioned, which is so critical, is capacity build, is the capacity that has been built over the years. There are so many people now that understand power. They are interested. Even the customers now are interested in understanding their bills. Before, there was no interest. They didn't understand when tariffs went up. They didn't understand units. But you can see customers these days engaging you on their bills and demanding supply. Before, it wasn't like that. And even today, you see customers demanding accountability from all, not just the licensees, but even the regulator, to do what they need to do. And of course, this comes to the point you raised about the estimated billing. And you agree with me that the regulator sitting there has to try to balance the interests of just you as a licensee, as well also the customers, to ensure that there's no abuse of power. So the capped estimated billing, being introduced is to kind of mitigate a long-standing estimated billing process, and to kind of push the discourse in this sense to meter. So yeah, thank you so much positives, and I'm hoping that participants that are joining today will be quite enlightened about all the positives that has happened over the years. Lastly, Onyinye, do you want to give us some more to this bucket list?
Yes. Thank you very much, Rahila, and a big thank you to EMRC for organizing this event, and shout out to all my bosses here. Something that many people do not know here is that 2 people on this panel used to do my KPIs at some point in my life. And I consider it a privilege to be here and to share a stage. And I'll just start with what Ugo said. I think the capacity building stands out, and I mean I'll say for myself, I started working in Ikeja Electric in 2014, just after the privatization. Right, and it was because of that liberalization. It was because it was open that companies like Ikeja Electric and all the other privatized companies had the opportunity to recruit younger people, train them, like Ugo rightly mentioned, help the entire ecosystem. Right, a lot of the people, like we did the graduate training program with Ikeja Electric, are no longer there, and they're in other spaces in the power sector doing amazing things. So I think that has been very critical. The fact that the private sector had to come in, and usually once private sector comes in, it goes with a lot of development, a lot of capacity building, a lot of learnings, and it brings in a lot of innovation. I mean, when you're writing Ugo's profile, all the work that is being done by him and other people in the sector, that whole cross-fertilization of ideas, bringing in processes and systems from the private sector into the energy space, has really opened up the market. That's why, we can push back at NEC, because the kind of people that are having those conversations are well versed in what they do. And then specifically to speak about to then speak about, what the government has done in the mini grid space. I think, and to answer your question, I think, looking at it from the intent of EPSR, right? I think the mini grid space better mirrors, the competitive markets that the Act was supposed to achieve. Because today, even though, of course, there are still some challenges, right? The sector is open, right? Any mini grid developer can go anywhere, can go to any state in Nigeria, discuss with the community, tell them I want to give them power. If they like me and if they like my proposition, they say yes, they sign an exclusivity agreement, I submit it to NEC. That agreement gives the developer, 1 year to go and raise finance and do whatever they have to do to bring equipment to site. And if in that 1 year, the developer doesn't come back, another developer has the right to go into that space and do the same work, right? So it really allows for open selection of communities, right? So you go in there, once you sign the exclusivity agreement, you negotiate your tariffs. The MITO for the mini grid space is a bit light-handed than the one for the grid. But in a manner of speaking, the developer can decide the tariff they want. You can decide to charge daytime tariff, nighttime tariff, single tariff, unlike what we have with the grid space, where it's like NEC gives you the tariff, or at least gives you the model and sets more constraints. So there are less constraints in our tariff setting than we have, right? And then you negotiate that tariff, not just that you agree with NEC, you negotiate with the community. So NEC must agree, the community must agree, right? So the space is really open, and you have those conversations. You have to go down there, you have to have those community engagements, you have to communicate to the community. They agree. And I keep saying to a lot of my friends, a lot of my customers have better supply than I do. Because if we're going to use the grid banding, most mini grid developers, most mini grid customers are in band A. I find I don't know anybody that has less than 18 hours of supply. I don't know of any developer, right, that gives their customers less than 18 hours of supply, right? So you can see that the intent is being achieved. According to the REA, over 60 mini grids have been built. Of course, a lot of them were built in the last 2-3 years. And one thing, again, that the government did that was very critical, that helped to really break the barriers in the market, was the financing that was brought in through the World Bank, where we have a result-based financing that allows for mini grid developers, to earn a subsidy per connection. And the good thing about it was it's, as much as it's a bit difficult, but it's not an upfront grant, right? It's a performance-based grant. You get it at the end of work. So it also made sure that it's the serious people that come in, like you don't just collect the grant and run away. And systems are digital, right? So the way it's verified, your meters must be communicating with the platform. So you can't even just snap a picture and send, right? Okay. Your meters must communicate. And in many instances, they check that the meters are vending. So you also cannot just put a meter for anybody and run away. Right? Those meters must be vending, and that's the last phase of verification before you're paid your grant. So I think a lot of work has gone in, and also the government was able to bring in a lot of partnerships. The World Bank is seriously on it. AFDB is also providing a lot of support for that space, and it's gradually opening up the market. There was a time the PPG was $350 per connection. There was very slow uptake. It was increased to $600 per connection. And we saw a lot more people coming in to take up that space. So I think, in the spirit of the EPSR, it has opened up the market. Reliability for customers is very high. Generation capacity is increasing. And of course, we're transiting Nigerians more and more away from energy poverty and giving energy availability. And I dare say, better than my Oga here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oye, for that contribution. And obviously, EPSRA, the intention, like we said, is to create a competitive market. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think everything that the three of you have put on the table as outcomes and positives are the layers required to get us there. So yes, we're not there yet, but it's a slow journey. But I think we are putting all the required ingredients on the table to get us there. Now I'd like us to get into like the sections of, the electricity value chain. And I always like to start with the generation, and that's you, Kolapo. Transcorp Power recently became the first privatized GenCo to receive a discharge certificate from the government this month. This was after the National Council on Privatization approved that Ughelli Power PLC had met its key post-acquisition requirements, which was to increase the capacity of the plant from 300 megawatts to about 670 megawatts, which it actually surpassed. And I think about 84 billion naira was sunk in to achieve this. Again, recently we had Mainstream, who in 2013 got the concession of Kainji and Jeba hydroelectric power plants, and recently acquired Zungeru hydroelectric power under a concession arrangement. Now, if you look at these two examples, it shows here that capacity is being increased. And again, there's a lot of positives from this angle. But when you look at the fact that at privatization, you had 6-7 generation companies that were privatized, and today after 10 years, you only have one company who has been able to achieve that expansion. So I think to also explain for some that may not know this is when generation was privatized, one of the main KPI was the installed capacity for the generation. Every preferred bidder or the investor that took over needed to ensure that they ramped up the capacity to that installed capacity. And in doing that, then you've achieved your KPI, your performance targets. So for the GenCos, this was it. Now, out of 6-7 GenCos that were sold 100% to private sector, Transcorp Power is the only one that has achieved that, which is not a good score if you look at it. And of course, Mainstream acquiring another hydro is expanding its portfolio, increasing generation, but it hasn't gotten us there. Today, we have 13,000 megawatts plus of installed capacity. 7,000 of that is available, but we're getting just 4,000. So in between that, there is stranded capacity. So in your view, Kolapo, what has hindered the generation? What has hindered significant improvement in generation expansion? And why aren't we seeing a lot of Transcorp Power? Why is it Transcorp Power today, 10 years, and when you have Transcorp about meeting the performance target, surpassing it in this instance? Why aren't we seeing generators expanding the capacity they currently have? I mean, if you look at the national NCC load projected load demand forecast, it says that Nigeria's load is about 25,000 megawatts. So if you look at the fact that we're just getting 4,000 and the demand is about 25,000 megawatts, it tells you that there's a huge demand for it. So it'd be good to shed some light on this from a GenCo perspective, and why is this happening? Over to you, Kolapo.
All right, thank you, Rahila. I think first I would like to shed some light on NSP's background, because I think it's very important. Because you mentioned Transcorp Power, NSP was the first company to issue a green bond and the longest tenured bond in Nigeria, a 15-year bond, 7 years ago. So this was at a very difficult time. This was even when the Buhari Jonathan election was being done, and we issued that bond. And since then, and when we have the highest credit rated power company in Nigeria, I think that fact needs to be acknowledged. And that's not just by fluke. There were intentional steps to do that. Now, in terms of the performance target, when I look at NSP, we've met ours. The only thing we are just processing ours, we need to take it as a priority because it's a concession, But when we took over the plant, it was at 450 megawatts. Presently, as you know, it's 600 megawatts, and you cannot expand a dam. So same thing with Mainstream. The hydro dams cannot be expanded because it's there's what we call a capacity factor, or what we call is driven by God, rain. And that capacity factor says, based on the 30 years of historical rainfall pattern. This is what dam can do, and the dam is built around that. But what else can we do beyond that? One of the things we are doing is that we're doing a solar farm. And we are doing the first phase of 20 megawatts, and it will be the first hybridized, if you look at it, because we're going to do it with our, I don't be connected to the grid. So as of today, TCL will not connect any solar project to the grid, because it on a standalone, it brings a lot of risk to the TCL infrastructure. But we can do that because the hydro helps us balance that risk. In the event that it's going to invest in synchronization equipment to make sure that we don't put the grid at risk. I just wanted to give that context in it. So you've seen a lot of successes beyond the Transcorp. However, I think what has happened in that, it's sometimes also driven by, and that's why when you talk about generation has always outgrown what the distribution is willing to take, and you see them reject the power of the transmission. You see that happen, and that's because on the generation side of things, there is a good understanding of how it's being run. We have a customer we sell to, or several customers, but it's mainly embed primarily, and then several eligible customers. So the business structure is quite simple, and to get your money back is quite simple, even though there are some constraints in getting your money back. But what's the biggest risk for us? When I think of, and I'll look at it from perspective of my experience now, we conceived this solar project about close to 10 years ago, 9 years ago. We've had our license to do 300 megawatts at the solar farm. So it was very innovative because we wanted to hybridize. But what made us hold back on that investment was primarily then who were we going to sell the power to? Because then the power, even then selling your power was getting your money in full was difficult, unlike now that government has provided interventions. So that's one. But also, we didn't know where the dollar exchange rate was going to. So by the time we had fully finished the project, we had gotten an APC contract. We said, okay, let's slow down. Now we've even moved into 20 megawatts, what we call a pre-phase one, and then we're going to 100 megawatts straight. So I think for any investor, if there's no clarity on an enforcement of their contract rights, and there's no clarity on how what kind of tariff they can get and how the market is evolving, then it brings a lot of risks into, do you want to do that? Do you want to expand beyond, because solar is expensive. The yield on solar is 21% on average in the north, at least if I do a solar farm in the north, it's about 21%. So it comes with some cost, and therefore you have to think very clearly in order to do that. And also, I think looking at it, because you're also being careful, because solar's technology was evolving. And again, I'm looking from my perspective. So if you buy a panel 5 years ago with battery and everything, the efficiency is different from what you have here. It's a lot more efficient. And therefore your yields are better, your returns are better. So that also kind of impacted decision making. But I think for any generator, I think for most generators, and I think look at we also participate in Zungeru. So mainstream one, and they're going to pay about 350 million USD. That's significant. Looking at, there's still confidence in the sector, especially hydro. And for the thermals, for them, the constraint has typically been around the gas issues, right? Gas is priced in dollars, the reliability of it coming, then also the price, it's priced in dollars, and how do you pass that through? Even though now it's being recognized and everything, but that has always been the constraint for any thermal, really, generation space. Then the last point, that when you generate this power, right, your concern is that, can you get it to the grid, and are there enough customers to take it? We say that the 25,000 megawatts is what customers can, but are they paying customers? Do they have the capacity to pay for that power?
That's a good question.
Yes, that demand is there, but do they have the capacity? Probably the capacity of what people can pay is probably 5,000 megawatts. But the way I see, honestly, the way I see things is that generation currently outstrips transmission distribution. and it's probably going to continue like that for a while, because of the way just the way the dynamics are. But I think it will get much better if we're able to, one, increase the capacity of paying customers, and that's a macro issue, can be dealt with by people like us, because there's ability to export our power. Right now, we have grids, and I think there's not that I think, I know there's a West African power pool. It's a huge initiative for that, because we realize that Nigeria can supply power to the whole West Africa. That's the truth. But
that would depend on, I mean, we recently did a report on that, and the greatest challenge in that export is the infrastructure.
Correct.
You know, the grid is back again to the problem we have locally here, that we have stranded capacity. New generators are not incentivized to expand or increase your capacity, because one, like you rightly said, offtake is key. And it's not just offtake, but who is off-taking your power? Do they have the capability to do that on a consistent basis? Can you access Forex at the CBN rate versus what is happening in the parallel market? And the other thing you talked about was a contract enforcement. You have a contract, you know, does the market, is it done in a way that the contracts can actually be enforced between both parties? So all that is there, and you have a replica of those problems, even in the West African power pool, the biggest being investment that needs to go there to unlock, for the grid, for you to be able to transport power.
I definitely
but what you say, so what you, I mean, that's, I guess, there are some of these things that are actually out of the hands of the generators, but from what we've also seen, that even within the 7,000 megawatts that is available from the 13, we have also seen that the generators are not meeting the demand at when they should. So yes, we talked about gas. So I think that was why in recent times, NERC had to issue an SLA for the generators to also sign up, because they realized it wasn't just a TCN issue or a distribution issue. It was also the fact that sometimes the generators were not coming forth. So they needed to also put generators on the line to say, you know what, if you do not meet your obligations, then there are repercussions to that. How that is being implemented or enforced, I don't have clarity over it, but I know that, everybody, if you want to, point fingers across the value chain, the generators should be the least, but we have in recent times seen that the generators also, renege on their contracts or the expectation for them to meet certain demand. I think this will take me, so thank you, Kolapo, for that. This will take me nicely into Onyie, who on this platform represents mini-grid, renewables, and of course, when in 2016, Onyie, if you're there, in 2016, NERC released the mini-grid regulation. It was issued to support off-grid solutions as an important step in addressing energy poverty, driving rural electrification, and closing the significant energy access gap in Nigeria. Today, it's still under 50% in terms of energy access. The key objectives of this regulation is to simplify the process for private sector participation in the mini-grid. I think you spoke to that earlier in terms of how the market has opened, and financing and the ability of power developers to go into the market and meet their customers and have a willing buyer, willing seller, a negotiation on what is required. Another objective was to increase access to electricity, of course, to unserved and underserved parts of Nigeria. And obviously, when we talk about underserved parts of Nigeria, that also includes areas within the distribution network where customers are not, their full requirements are not met. And lastly, here is also increasing the profitability of loss-making areas and wider coverage of paying customers. Now, I know you mentioned earlier that over 60 mini-grids have been built in the last 3 years. Well, this regulation has been here for 6 years. And the question is, I've heard people talk about it, that why haven't we seen a much more, a proliferation of mini-grids, much more than what you've stated, given that the grid is constrained, the energy access is very low, the demand is high, Customers are hungry, they're happy to pay for reliable power, given the expense they make on generators and the noise pollution and all that. Why haven't we seen much more than we are seeing? I mean, 60 mini grids in 3 years. It's not, when you look at the intention and the excitement that there was when this regulation was issued. In fact, someone at that time said, in no time there'll be nobody on the grid actually taking power. Your thoughts on this?
Okay, thank you very much, Rahila. I think, like you said, the mini grid regulation, fantastic. If I was in a conference, we had the mini grid conference in Kenya sometime earlier in the year, and I remember I was in a panel, and all the other African countries, for every question they asked, it always looked like the panelists would just say, go and look at Nigeria's mini grid regulation. They've answered the question. In fact, at some point, somebody in the panel asked the question and said, before you answer, don't say Nigeria. Answer the question first. That's how much our regulation is almost being copy-pasted across Africa, right? Regulation, fantastic, but we don't look at Nigeria in isolation, right? There are other macroeconomic forces that affect me, affect Kolakbo, affect Ugo, and affects even the markets on the road, right? So FX is a big issue, inflation is a big issue. I mean, let's not overflog that. But all those things are also our realities. But then speaking directly into the mini grid space, the main barrier that we have faced is the financing. The return on investment for mini grid needs to have some level of social capital to it. You almost can't raise commercial capital to build mini grids. We need investors that need to come in ready to finance portfolios. And to answer your question, not just one, but volume, right? Not one, not two, not three. Ready to finance portfolios, but also ready to look beyond the commercial numbers and look at the social impact that it's going to have. Look at the fact that, at the end of the day, providing power creates a platform for economic development of those communities. Remember that, again, beyond the financing barriers, and when you go to speak to your financiers, there's issue of demand, right? This demand that we speak about is theoretical, it's in our heads. These customers are completely unserved, right? You don't know what the demand will be. The best you can do is an Excel model, quoting everything that you can quote and plugging all the sensitivities you can plug. But at the end of the day, if you build a system there, who says that they're going to connect power? Yes, I mean, there are lots of other things you do in your assessment. You want to find out that, these people are already using diesel, or they're already using an alternative source. You want to check the density of the community. You want to see, is there a large need for some level of agro-processing? Yeah, all of that comes into the model. But at the end of the day, the demand can only be theoretical, right? And so that becomes a challenge. How do we accurately model this demand such that after modeling, when we build our mini grids, it's almost the same, or the error margins are, we're within the error margins. That's another barrier. And that also, again, fits into the financing, because if you can convince your financiers that this demand is real, then, you can raise the finance that is required to build the mini grids. And one key thing that has put the lever, right? Before now, we had the grant was $350 per connection, which according to the results showed it wasn't enough, not according to the stories. In the past 2 years, when the grant increased to $600 per connection, we saw, now you can go and take bridge loans. You can go and say to a bank, I've signed my NEP contract. I can leverage on this contract to take a loan, because once this contract, you can even be a party to it. Once this money comes in, you go straight to your account. You can escrow the account, and it becomes a payoff. So then that has helped. But also, just to say, right, there are 67 mini grids that have been completed. However, over 200 grant agreements have been signed. So that means that at least, in fact, over 250 grant agreements have been signed. So that means that as we speak, and this report was last year's report, 200 mini grids are being built. Right? This was last year, and more grant agreements are being signed this year for the mini grid. It takes, and secondly is that we have a long gestation period. remember that we're building a power plant. Even though it's a miniature power plant, it's not, we can't wake up today, even if I have all the money in my account, I can't wake up today and deliver a mini grid tomorrow. It's going to take 6, 9, 18 months, depending on procurement. That's one. Two, a lot of the systems that we need, right, are not produced in Nigeria. Some of them are not even on shelf. Like, even if I had the money today, if I call today, it can't leave the ports tomorrow. It has to be manufactured, right? So that goes into a very long gestation period of procurement. We have a very long procurement lead time to build this mini grid. So that's why there seems to be this delay. That's why even though 260 grant agreements have been signed, only about 67 has been delivered, because there's a long period, for construction, for customer education, for customer sign-ups and all of that. Remember, it's both a generating plant and a distribution network. Both have to be built before power is delivered. But I think we're making significant progress, and where the market is going, if we continue, if the support remains, the renewal of the NEP grants, which comes to an end later this year, which will create a hole in the market if not renewed, hoping that the new government.
So if it is not, I mean, I want to take that off. So if it's not renewed, does it in any way impair or affect the current 250 mini grids that is ongoing at the moment? Would it affect it?
My understanding is it will not. The agreements have been signed, right? Those agreements have been signed by all the necessary parties. And for a lot of them, even some, because the payouts are in milestones, you get a 40%, you get it. So for some of them, maybe milestone 1 or milestone 2 has happened. It's just that milestone 3. And maybe this number has increased. Like I said, this is the IREA report from the end of last year. So a lot could have also happened in the past 5 months. So we don't believe it's going to affect that. But of course, signing new grants agreement post-October this year may have some challenges. There are lots of stakeholder engagement going on, hoping that we get a renewal of the funding and even better streamlined, made better to make sure that we continue. But I mean, the REA estimates that we need about 10,000 mini grids in Nigeria to reach that dream that you spoke about, where nobody wants to be on the grid network. And I think significant progress is happening. It's not without its challenges, but we're getting there.
Of course, I mean, every good thing has a challenge. I mean, for you to achieve anything, there will be a challenge to push you there. And I know that one of the biggest challenge when you talked about modeling demand and how certain that can be, one of the things that a lot of developers have said is, start up a project and you have demand and it's all good, you have established what your return is, everything, and then you realize that demand side management kicks in. So I don't know if, that has been your experience, and for developers you have worked in, how have they been able to go around that? You have a project, you have done all the economics, the modeling, you have a demand, and then, halfway through that project, or actually the operation, demand starts to drop, because people certainly realize that I don't need to pay 3,000. If I manage my demand, I can just pay 1,500 or 2,000 naira a month. And of course, that kind of, demands the entire commercial arrangement around the project. And of course, this is why I believe you talked about the need to include social capital. And to add to that, before you comment, and I go on to the next person, is this constitutional amendment that has been done. Do you see that playing a role in terms of facilitating more of this mini grids, enhancing or giving it a boost? Do you think that the fact that the state can now participate will kind of remove some of those constraints or challenges that you have mentioned? So kind of 2 questions in one. 1 minute. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. So it's normal. It's normal human habits, right? Even though Abuja Disco is increasing my bill, my tariff every month, my energy charge doesn't go up. But I know that when I'm living in the morning, I turn off everything. There's a budget in my head for energy. It doesn't really goes beyond that, even though I know tariff has gradually been increasing for the past 6 months, right? So it's the same thing. If I'm doing it, then of course I expect my customers to do it. It's the same thing. And specifically, if you look at the economic models for those kind of people, it's said that it's the the demand is inelastic. It's not elastic for them, right? What happens is that there's a budget that you need to spend on electricity, and once you spend it, you're gone. So we also understand that, right? And so when we do our types, we understand that, oh, these communities, this is this highest amount of money you're going to get from them in a month. Even if you give them reliable power, if that power goes off 2 days into when they buy their unit, that's the end. You're waiting another 28 days before you get money from them, right? So we take that into consideration. You know, as we do our models, there are different things we use. Average consumption per user. We also use average revenues per user. We put those two to say that even if consumption is not there, we know that the revenue is going to be within a certain amount a month. So we lean more towards that. And then, I mean, a lot of mini-grid developers, us inclusive, we also go into appliance financing, where we help the communities to lower the barriers to buying appliances, help them in their businesses, understand their business value chain. So right now, we're doing even more than providing power. We're providing services, right, that enables us to stimulate this demand by helping them in their own businesses. So you see somebody that needs to do agri processing, has a massive farm, but it's not processing there, is rather selling. You know, you have a conversation with them. How can we help you? Oh, we want to buy a meal. A meal is 1 million naira. You know, thankfully, there are a lot of social capitalists around. You have a conversation, maybe you're able to reduce the interest rate to a single digit. You know, you have this conversation, pay us back over 24 months. The rate is not so high. And so you're helping that person. Now, you're then into another business of selling appliances, of selling products, right? And so, you know, they help, you know, it helps their business. Of course, it's helping you again. So we are gradually getting into the entire value chain. So because, of course, if there's a new mill, say there's a 15 horsepower mill in the village now, it's going to use our electricity. And so, you know, we're increasing demand, we're increasing our revenue, we're getting financing for the appliances, and we're helping them with their business. I mean, that whole productive use appliance models, there are lots of them. There's a keymaker model. We can do a lot. A lot is going on. A lot of developers are trying different things because, I mean, we're here for the long run and we want to stimulate this development. So once we see that we can, we will. Then the second question around the states.
The state.
Yes, I think on the overall, it looks like a welcome development, but like I say, we haven't gotten into the details. We need to get into the details to work it out. But once we also see consistency and coherence in the policies, right? Make sure that it's aligned with the overall and the overarching goal, and make sure that, you know, it doesn't by itself include more barriers, but that's actually is breaking down the barriers. Once the policies are helping break down the barriers, helping with energy access, the World Bank says there are 92 million people in Nigeria without energy access, helping reduce that deficit. I mean, it's a welcome development.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Onyinye. And this takes me to Ugo. In terms of, you know, Onyinye talked about the fact that if you have, every customer has a certain limit of how much they can pay every month. And of course, as things become even more difficult, I mean, inflation is high, food inflation, and you can imagine what is happening now with the PMS subsidy out. People begin to prioritize their expenses in their homes. Electricity will not be one of them. So if I have, you know, a certain amount of money I'm going to pay, that's all I'm going to pay. And if I'm not even metered, even worse. Yes, there's estimated billing and there's the caps and all that. But all that I believe comes out to play to affect the revenues of DISCO. So we talk about ATC&C losses. And this is where I'm going to with this. ATC&C losses are KPIs for DISCOs, which should have been met within 5 years of the performance agreement signed with BPE. This has now ended, and performance monitoring moved to NAP. The implication of the ATC&C on tariff is simply that the higher ATC&C that's passed through by the regulator, the higher the tariffs will be for customers. Between the privatization and now, let's look at 2015, 2016 to now, tariffs have increased by over 100%, which is quite high, given the fact that we are still not meeting at least even 50% of the demand. We're still not meeting that. So that's a problem. Average industry losses today is slightly under 50%. And the idea is to get to an area between 11 and 15% by international standards. So over the years, there has been a continued discussion by DISCO saying that there's a mismatch between what the regulator has projected as your ATC&C and what the actual ATC&C is. What would you say have been the key causes of this mismatch? I would like you to kind of, provide some insight on this. Why is that? I mean, you know that if you increase your ATC&C, the tariffs will go up. If the tariffs go up, and for Ikeja, for example, that you have, I think you mentioned earlier, 70% of your customers have been metered. That's pretty good compared to some of your peers who perhaps have less than 30% metering. So if you're in that band, the higher your ATC&C losses are, and it's allowed to pass through tariffs, the higher they will be. And if customers have fixed incomes or fixed mindset in terms of how much they'll pay, your losses skyrocket. It'd be good to hear from you as a DISCO. Over to you, Go. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahila, and great listening to Kolakwa and Unya as well. Respond to some of your questions. I did learn a lot as well. ATC&C losses, as everyone knows, is aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses. It's a very well-known metric in the industry for measuring DISCO performance. And the way it works is the lower your ATC&C losses, technically, the lower the tariffs could be as well, because the way tariffs are set up, those losses are being paid by the customers, and so it's grossed up, to the tariffs. But there's been a mismatch over the years, and I think this mismatch started as far back as 2014, even when privatization just took over. When privatization, started. So why was there a mismatch? I think the first thing you want to look at is the baseline studies that was conducted in 2014. At the time when DISCOs were taking over, distribution, when the privatized companies, when companies were taking over DISCOs from the government, they were, told to undertake a baseline study. And of course, the baseline study essentially tells you where, the ATC&C losses were at the time. And then that is now used as a benchmark to set a target ATC&C losses that all DISCOs were supposed to achieve. So I think the problem started then because, first of all, at that time, a lot of DISCOs didn't have enough information. There's a lot of information asymmetry, and they didn't have enough detail to actually determine what the true ATC&C losses were. So the timing of the baseline studies was not enough. I think maybe they should have allowed a baseline study before and after takeover, so that one can establish fully what the real ATC&C losses is. And then the methodology for determining the ATC&C losses as well, in hindsight, you look at it and say, look, that wasn't done properly. Currently in Ikeja Electric, we're looking at franchising some of our distribution networks to franchisees, and the sort of baseline studies that we are requesting the franchisees to do, if we have been told to do that same type of baseline studies 8-9 years ago, I think things may have been different today. So the methodology is completely different from what it was back then, because there was a lack of understanding of the intricacies in determining in the factors that drive ATC&C losses. And there's also lack of understanding in the causative factors of ATC&C losses, particularly commercial and collection losses in DISCOs. A lot of people, even to today, outside of distribution companies, don't fully understand, the ramifications and the causative factors of commercial losses and collection losses. I think it's just assumed, it's just all theft, or it's just DISCO being inefficient. There's a whole lot that is involved in commercial and collection losses and why they happen. And if you understand why you have so much commercial losses, and then it's easy to know that, look, when you set a loss trajectory that is, that is maybe 3 months or inadequate, then you're essentially setting up a distribution company to fail. So I give you an example. You say, commercial losses maybe Disco's commercial losses on day one is probably 30% or 35%, and you're saying, oh, bring it down to 10% in 2 years. And a huge part of that is actually customers that you've metered. So you've metered the maximum demand customer, metered the customer, everything is fine. Are you expected to go and hire an army to go and keep checking that maximum demand customer, or protecting that revenue, or doing vigilance on that customer on a daily basis? No. But what tends to happen is that you see that customers like that go at any length just to steal energy. So it's either they dig underground cable, bypass under the transformer, do things that typically you don't expect to see in other clients that we're using as a benchmark for distribution companies. So that's a huge challenge. So understanding what actually are the consequences of commercial losses and how it happens, I think is one thing lacking at that time. And then on the back of that, we also had, because you don't understand clearly the constitutive factors and what it takes to get them out, then you end up setting the loss reduction trajectory for any distribution company. So if you're saying, look, it's going to take you 1 year or 2 years to reduce losses, then you also know clearly how much that is going to cost and what level of investment needs to go in to set that loss reduction strategy, to ensure that loss reduction strategy is achieved. So I think these were some of the challenges that we've had over the last 9 years, and that was why you've always seen a mismatch, and that mismatch still exists today, Rahila. It does exist today, yes, because let me give you a typical example. IE started the what we call IE Prestige, or bilateral power, or premium power, some people like to call it, in areas like Ikeja, GRA, Magodo, GRA, and some locations. You'd be surprised to know that in some of these locations that are 100% metered, I'm not saying 95, I'm not saying 99, 100% metered, these locations, we still record ETCRC losses of 20%, in some cases 25%, 24%. And these guys have been running for the last 3-4 years. So we realize that it's not enough for them to get metered. You actually have to replace most of the meters there. Apart from replacing some of the meters there, you actually have to do an entire rewiring of the entire network, right? Because these were locations that were metered maybe 10, 15 years ago. Some of the customers that were metered were bypassed upon metering. Some of them, the network is so porous that these guys can easily just prick a wire on the line and then start to steal energy. So that requires a lot of work and a lot of investment. So if you understand that it takes a long time to get a loss reduction, to get a 5 or 10% loss reduction, then you set the target. So I think that's the reason for the mismatch. I just think the regulators don't fully understand. Not just regulators, even most people outside of distribution don't fully understand the ramifications and the constitutive factors of ETCRC losses.
I get you, but let me wear the hat of a customer and also the regulator. So let me wear that hat. Okay. I understand everything you said. Now, Ikeja today, I think, is around 22% ETCRC losses, which is by far one of the lowest in the industry. And NERC wants you to be at 11%.
Yes.
I mean, that's going to be a huge leap from where you are today to where NERC wants you to be. And what I hear you say, and not just you as Ikeja, but all the distribution companies in terms of this mismatch, is that I need you to close that gap and just give me where I am today. But the challenge with that is that I may be passing a Disco's inefficiency in tariffs to customers. So in my view, I feel that Discos and the regulator have to meet midway, because as a regulator, in my mind, I'm saying that there must be some element of inefficiencies on your part as a distribution company, and I wouldn't want that to pass to my customers. So while I agree that there's a mismatch, I don't think the case can be, take the 22% and just plug into tariffs, because out of that 22%, there's a percentage of that that might be as a result of your inefficient operation. And I don't want to pass that to customers. So I feel like there must be a middle ground. If the regulator would agree to that, that is where you want to be as a DISCO, don't you think?
You see, I mean, I've heard this narrative a number of times, and most times it always sounds very hollow or bogus. You know why? Because when you say DISCO's inefficiency, you can't streamline it. Okay, what is that inefficiency? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 4%? You can't really streamline it. And the reason why you can't streamline it is because you have to come in and do a proper study and properly understand, look, what aspect of this 22% is due to DISCO's inefficiency, and then distill it. Oh, which of these idiosyncrasy losses is due to MDAs not being able to pay their debt? Which of these inefficiencies is due to areas or localities or networks that are prevalent for stealing, right? Which of this is, like, there are several components of idiosyncrasy losses that you need to fully understand for you to now say, okay, this is the portion that I think is DISCO's responsibility due to inefficiency, because you properly dimensioned it. And one other thing, Rahila, is that I've always mentioned, I said, look, the day the sector understands that collection is not just DISCO's responsibility, is the day everyone wakes up. Because when you realize that so long as DISCOs are able to collect money and there are no losses, the entire sector will be made whole. Because if you don't collect that, if you don't plug that hole, if you don't make sure that your money is complete, then nobody's going to backstop anyone.
But you're the sole, it's your sole responsibility as a distribution company to collect your power.
That's the misnomer. And I'm going to tell you why it's a misnomer. You're saying it's my sole responsibility that I collect money. Okay. Yes. But there are several factors, there are several issues on the distribution side that is not my responsibility, that I cannot control. I don't control how the power comes or when the power comes, right? I can't control that. 1 second, please. I can't control when the power comes or how it comes. I can't control it. Customers who steal my energy, when I catch them, I cannot prosecute them. That's not within my control. And sometimes when I even catch them, I can only back bill in 3 months, right? And then customers as well who don't pay me, MDAs who don't pay me, there's really little to nothing that I can do. They keep owing me for months. I can't do anything. That is not only my responsibility. Then you also have you also live in a country where you don't have proper town planning. Anybody can just wake up and build anything that he likes and then string any line how he wants it. So there are several things outside of my control. And of course, even the sort of metering that we have today, the metering technology today is also not adequate to, I mean, that's the story for another day, but the metering technology we have is not adequate to protect DISCOs from losses. So I think that there are several things, there are several issues within or the several constitutive factors of idiosyncrasy losses that the entire sector needs to understand. Look, it's not the DISCO's responsibility alone to fix. Everyone needs to come together and say, look, how do we solve this problem? Because this is where we all get our money from. So if we can't get our money from here, is it the GENCO that will want to be a DISCO? Or is it the transmission, the TCN that's going to be a DISCO? No. DISCOs are always going to need that support from the entire sector. So I think if we don't sort that out, then we're not going anywhere, right? Like, yes, it's the DISCO's responsibility to collect money, but let's also understand that everyone shares in that responsibility. If that money is not collected, then it doesn't go all the way up. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I thank you, and I agree with you that it's important as DISCO at the tail end that's taking all that money and paying everybody upstream. Everybody, upstream on the value chain should be interested in ensuring that a DISCO collects that money. But ultimately, if you get 300 megawatts in your, dispatched into your network and you actually send it to customers, you should go after your customers. And, I think recently NERC issued an order in which you can actually, cut or disconnect customers in 12 days. I think it was a recent, I haven't read it, but it's a recent order. So at the end of the day, yes, everybody has collective responsibility in terms of energy theft, for example. But I think when you sit and say, okay, whose ultimate responsibility it is to ensure that if energy sold money is collected is a DISCO. Now, this takes me to another conversation, which I would like all of you to contribute to before I open it up to the floor for participants. I can see a couple of questions that have been posted. Over the years, talking about ATC&C losses and the fact that there's a lot of tariff shortfalls that have developed over the years, and the struggle that the distribution end have had in terms of accessing finance, to do, the metering, the network and upgrades and all that is required. Government has had to, contribute or intervene in different ways. I mean, they've came through in 2015 with a 213 billion naira Nigerian Electricity Market Stabilization Fund. There's the payment assurance facility 1 and 2, estimated at 1.3 trillion. There's even a portion of the World Bank. It's called the Power Sector Recovery Operation under PSRP of $750 million. And part of that also went for intervention. And the CBN, gave about 265 billion for operational expenses, as well as 115 billion for CAPEX. So if you sum up all this interventions by government, we're looking at an upper limit of 2 trillion naira. Depending on the exchanges you use, this is over $5 billion. And to put this in context, if we were to use 2 trillion to buy meters today, you'll be looking at about 16 to 20 million meters, depending on the sophistication of your meters. And if I were to establish a solar power farm, to build power plants using solar, there's a recent 10 megawatts that the Buhari administration had commissioned in January in Kano, that is funded and managed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, estimated the cost of that 10 megawatts at $16 million. So I use that and I say, okay, if we use that, which seems to be very expensive, by the way, you would have about 2,841 megawatts of solar power. So I'm giving this example so people, participants can appreciate what 2 trillion naira can do in the sector if it was channeled. So to the three of you, starting with Kolapo. Kolapo, obviously you represent GENCOs here on this panel, and a lot of people feel that GENCO, you are the ultimate beneficiaries, but yet over time, you've heard that GENCOs are being owed, GENCOs are unhappy, because of money not being paid. GENCOs are not being able to do their operational and maintenance. So a lot of conversation around this issue of not having sufficient revenues to meet operations, even at the generation end, has happened. And then, of course, to the DISCO, the question will be, why has this not impacted the sector positively? Why has it kind of limited the distribution companies, in a sense, from accessing more financing over the years? And so it'd be good to hear from GENCO and DISCO. So Kolapo, please, you go first. Why hasn't this intervention really impacted the sector as it should? 2 trillion naira is a lot of money.
Yeah, so if you think of how this sector was structured when it came to all this intervention, the idea was MBED was going to phase out. And what you have, MBED being there kind of spoils all the parties because it continues to incentivize DISCOs to less performance, and even GENCOs also. Some of us who are not really meeting some of our power purchase agreements, requirements. Because when you sign with government entity, so don't forget, we all sign with government entity, vesting contracts, DISCOs and the government entity, PPAs, GENCOs and the government entity. It creates an incentive for a lot of bad activities just because the government entity that is a government that is taking the hit. Now, that's why I think the last intervention CBN did was a smarter one, in which they now gave the loans directly to the books of the balance sheets of the DISCOs. Previously,
which one?
The last the OPEX, the
OPEX and CAPEX.
Yes, that was smart because what they escrowed their cash. So I forgot to mention that's a major milestone to bring more transparency and visibility to the cash flow in the system. And that's why you see a lot of them have at least the Abujas, the Ikejas, and Eco Discos, we can now see their numbers clearer, you know, and you can see the losses. Now, I think what the previous interventions, what it did was it went straight to MBET and said, oh, MBET, you're going to give a facility, the generation companies, you make them whole and things like that, without a corresponding creating an accountability mechanism with the discos. So there was no escrow of their cash. There was no direct deduction from them, you know, taking out the loans over. I don't know if Ugo, I agree with all these things. But I think at the end, this last one has brought a lot of accountability. And you see, and as I said, in the last 2-3 years, I think the right steps have been taken in trying to prove that. The previous interventions went to do, you know, yes, make the generation companies whole. And that's why we've continued to meet a lot of us have continued to meet our requirements. And that's why you see there's no challenge really on the generation space. But the delay in payments, not fully paying for like the deemed capacity issues we have, and when they try to ramp down, that's a contractual issue that, you know, MBET has refused to pay us on, all of us on it. You know, so on and so forth. But the reality is, I think if we can continue with this, even if they give it in the interventions, there must be a way to be able to track performance, and a way to phase them out to leave the sector. And that's why I'm happy when MBET was renewed, was done for 3 years. And now the next step is bilateral contracts. What we have is when you say AMCON is a bad bank, and the other banks are good banks in Nigeria, what we're going to have is a bad market and good market. And the good market would be the Ecos, the Ikejas, the Abujas, and some others. Bilateral generation, and then you have the bad electricity market where you have the failing discos, which you know needs some bigger. It's a macroeconomic issue, and some other issues need to be addressed for that to be done. But looking at it, I think the intervention was needed. If the intervention did not come, trust me, you would have the generation companies dead. Because there's no way. Yes. Okay. I mean, don't forget at a point, the discos were remitting about 30% to the market on average.
Yeah, the stats.
60%. How would we pay for thermals, for the gas, and even for OPEC, CAPEX, and things like that? So in a way, the government had no choice towards doing that. But now what they've been able to do is push them, have minimum remittance order, push them, even the fact that they even considered taking out Aba distribution franchise, also taking out Kaduna Disco. That was a great positive. I don't think people recognize that. That has never been considered to that. And it's actually a wake-up call to other discos that this can happen. And even to private franchise, yes, because they did it to Abia, is it Abia, Abbas or Abba distribution franchise and everything. So I don't want to.
There's Abba and there's Akwa Ibom.
Akwa Ibom, yes.
As well.
I don't want anybody to think it's been wasted. I remember this $5 billion you stated is over 10 years. So it's not like I don't want people to think it's a subsidy, like they're spending $5 billion per annum. No, it's over 10 years.
No. Exactly.
I just want it for our viewers.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. Yes.
It's over 10 years, right? And it's been used for different things. Metering, OPEX, CAPEX, some transformers have been changed. They've helped meter some distribution DTs, some distribution transformers, which is required, critical for the distribution company. For the generation, all they've done for us is pay us our bills. They've not given us. So you're
made whole. So you're happy. So you benefited from this whole intervention, really, because the discos are still in the hole, but the gencos are smiling. So I mean, Ugo, I think it's a good time for you to step in.
No, Rahila, let me correct you. I don't think we benefited, because the reality is that if they did not do it, two things would have happened. We would have gone after the discos assets, and we would own the discos by now. I hope everybody understands that, because it's a liability, it's a debt, regardless. And that's why MBET has saved that aspect of things. So I think in a way, it's everybody has benefited, because the distribution companies, where they are now, sustained them the first 7 years where there was no accountability and there was nothing being done, helped them for the smart ones like Ikeja and Echo. They invested, and you can see the results, right? During that period where things were, they were getting all these interventions to support their operation. They did the right thing, and now they are coming out of it. They have lower HTC losses. Some did not really take advantage of that situation. So I don't think it was really to benefit the generation companies. Everybody benefited across the value chain.
But we're still at 4,000 megawatts. We're still at 4,000 megawatts. We're still at 50% ATC&C losses. We're still at under 40% metering. We're still at, so I mean I can go on. So that's the problem. So everybody's like, they gave you 2 trillion naira. Where did it go to? Ugo, please, over to you. Let's see what your contributions will be here.
Well, once again, I think I side to a large extent with Kolapo as well. Yes, I mean, I did mention that if you look back and say, look, what are some of the positive that we've seen? It was also the intervention funds that were given. But let's also remember, Rahila, that the intervention funds, a huge part of it went to tariff shortfalls, market shortfalls, and all of that, which were also, challenges we had in the entire market design. So because we got the market design wrong, implementation-wise from the get-go, you create a hole, and when you create a hole, somebody has to find a way to fill it, and the deeper that hole gets, the more difficult it is to fill. And I think we're also still in a hole, by the way. So it's going to take a long time to dig ourselves out of it. Yes, we've seen the latest intervention funds, at least the ones led by the CBN, were probably a lot better structured, a lot more accountability. I think there's also a lot more transparency and visibility in the way the cash flow works. And I think they did do one of the things I mentioned, understanding where the money is coming from and trying to tackle it. And that is why a huge portion of that intervention went towards metering. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to go past phase 0, which is the same point I'm making right now. If you want to ensure that ATC&C losses, drop, you need to ask yourself, why are they dropping? It's because you don't have enough meters. And then if you want to actually have DisCos hit 100% metering, then you should also be ready to show them a path to recovery of their investments, because metering is not cheap. So, and ATC&C losses is not the only contributory factor to tariff increases. Investment, CapEx, OpEx, they're all there. So if you spend all that money investing in metering, you need to find a way of recovering that money as well. And so that is also one challenge that DisCos will continue to have, and that's what they try to tackle with one of the intervention funds, pushed by the CBN. But I don't think we're able to go past phase 1, phase 0, and even phase 1, we've not seen most of it. And of course, there's also another thing as well, which is investment in the network itself. Network is aging. As much as we want more generation as well, but there's still limitation in the transmission capacity, the ability for the transmission to also wheel as much generation that we have. So even if likes of mainstream decide to invest a bit more in power generation, how are they going to distribute it? So there are great limitations that requires a lot of funding to deal with. And as the sector players are structured today, it's going to be very difficult for them to attract any kind of funding, to be honest, because the design, the market design doesn't just show any pathway to cost recovery. And so it's going to be difficult to get, any bank or any financial institution, any investor to want to put their money there. And so to that extent, yes, the intervention is welcome, but let's remember that most of it went towards sorting out the issues of tariff shortfall and market shortfalls. And then the ones that were had in most recent times is still not enough. We're only able to do phase 0 of metering. We're unable to do phase 1. I think it was meant to be phase 0, 1 and phase 2. We've not been able to make a lot of the investments that we needed to make at the distribution and transmission side. That hasn't been yet. We haven't seen the money yet. And the Siemens project didn't really go far. Let's remember that was meant to also aid improve power distribution and generation as well. So those things haven't happened yet. So yes, the money has been timely, but it's not enough, Raila. And I think that really is the story here. It's just not enough.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, obviously, I think the clarification as to what the intervention fund was for is very important, because a lot of people look at that intervention as monies that were just given. You know, you're supposed to do a lot of things, but most of that was for consumption, in the sense that you have, you bought energy in here to pay the people that supplied it, and there were shortfalls. That was a policy by government to saying that I don't want my customers to pay this certain level of tariffs, so we're going to take that hit. So there was all that as part of it. So let me open up the floor. There are some questions that have been posted. I want to take up, this is for, I think it's targeted at Onyie. And the question is saying, it's from Priscilla Obot. And Onyie, she's saying that, what incentives is the government giving to encourage license usage and establishment of off-grid installations? 1 minute, Onyie, if you can respond to this question.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. I think I've already said it earlier. We have a very robust granting scheme that allows for, it's called result-based financing. If you connect customers, off-grid customers, to the grid or to your mini grid, you get $600 per connection that you can prove with all the digital methodologies that we have. We also have something similar like that on the SHS side for smaller system capacities between 10 watts to 200 watts for off-grid installation. So those are the major incentives that are available to private installers, but government also has a lot of programs that you can bid for if you are a developer, like the Energizing Education Program, Energizing Economies, that builds power plants for schools and for markets. So there's some of all those programs that are also ongoing. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Onyie. The next question is for Kolapo, and this is from Femi Odewumi. He says, Kolapo, given the cost and complexities of bringing your solar farm online, I mean, you talked about this earlier, and your concern for the nation's electricity customers' earning power, is it safe? Is it still a safe bet to do this?
Yeah, I think right now, several things have occurred. One, at a point, so remember we started this project about 8 years ago. And then we have to hold it down, and now we should start construction, raise the funding, we start construction by next quarter, thereabouts, or achieve financial close and sign EPC contracts. Now, what has led us to change? One, the fact that they're eligible customers, that we can sign directly with customers. The fact that the way we've looked, we're able to raise capital. So don't forget, we raised the bond, 10-year money, 15-year money, and raised the 10-year money at 12%. And that was for the solar project. So we've been able to optimize our balance sheet and our funding sources, which some other private parties can't do. So on the financing side, we have that taken care of. And again, we didn't get dollar, we got Naira funding. So all our funding is Naira, because we don't want the exchange rate issue affecting our returns.
So we've learned from the initial privatization exercise, I guess.
Correct. And we were one of the first, to do several of these pioneering things. So from the financial structure, we looked at it. From the technology space of it, it's advanced since then. The yields are much more better, unlike before, when then you would get 17%. Now you can get up to 21% in terms of the average capacity from 1 megawatt of solar power you have there. Prices have come down a bit. Then I think looking at this new government, one of the good things that would happen is if they actually liberalize the exchange rate. Because what we have is an artificial, and I think Raila, you should have brought this up, because tariffs will most likely go up. Because
of course,
the generation companies, we bill, our tariffs are in dollars, but they pay us based on the prevailing exchange rate, which has been tied to 460. Now, if it goes up to 630, expect that up. Now, what has happened is that has also, when that artificial rate is created, it's also affected the ability of people like us to bring power to the grid, commercial, because if you look at it, I'm getting my dollar, forget I'm raising my fund in Naira. I still have to convert to dollars at 700 Naira.
Correct.
And go and purchase the equipment, right?
Purchase equipment.
Bring it to Nigeria. So, yes, when that affects my commercial returns on my modeling, the only thing I'll be able to do is to take the risk one-off as against, because I don't have a loan that is in dollar. So I've taken the risk one-off, but that increases my cost significantly. And because when I compare that to the tariff, so for example, my hydro tariff is about 4 cents. The best I can do on my solar tariff is 6-7 cents, but that's still better because when I look at what the thermals are doing, even with the depressed exchange rates, are doing about between 9 and 12 cents, depending on which thermal Azura and so on per kilowatt hour. So that's still competitive. But by the time this artificial, is removed, it creates more room for even, and you see a lot of more solar projects coming on stream. And the other thing that affected us, which I think somebody wrote an article, was what the World Bank did in Zambia by providing all these interventions. They created an artificial price for solar, which every government, even our embed, insisted, we will not start 11 cents per kilowatt hour. You go and get me, I've seen what has happened in Zambia, 4 cents, 6 cents. 4 cents or 5 cents per kilowatt hour. If you don't get that, we're not going to do. But it was a distortion because just like there's a shortfall, World Bank provided that kind of shortfall guarantee for these players, so they could get into that. But what they did, the long-term impact of what they did was that they distorted the markets and everything, and which I believe they've learned from that, and they won't go do it through that route to say we will subsidize and reduce the tariff to 4 cents, because then people like us who want to bring in commercial projects, they killed almost every project, even for us. From a point of view, every time I went to they'll say, go and get me 4 cents per kilowatt hour. I want to see that number. And I knew I could not do it. So, but at least it pushed us to do a couple of things. Go and raise a bond at very good terms, 10-year money, 12% at that point, below inflation. Made us look very well at our EPC contracting terms, have a local component, a dollar component, Naira component, different things like that. But still, we could not achieve the 4 cents. We're looking more of 6-7 cents per kilowatt hour to break even.
That's fantastic.
Oh, yes. So again, the reality is that, yes, this, Mr. Adeomi, this is a good time. So that is what has changed. A lot of the macro indices has changed. The market has opened up. I can bilaterally sell my power to discos under bankable terms. I can sell to eligible customers, because if I look at what eligible customers are paying now, especially when they will now increase the official rates, because when we do eligible customers, we still use the official exchange rate. But if it goes up 6 cents, it becomes much more realistic. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, so I can now compete, and my eligible customers will be willing to take it.
Ugo is saying no. We have gone over our time.
But one more thing.
One last question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One more thing I want to highlight, which you said, which we discussed about, we touched faintly, but I think the biggest thing Nigeria needs to move to is exporting power. I think that's a big earner. And when you talk about transmission infrastructure, they need to concession it out to private parties to build it. Private parties will build it as against relying on TCN to build everything. If TCN opens it up and does a concession of several routes, Ghana to this road, you'd see Nigerians build it because it's a no-brainer, right? And then this power will be real. It's a no-brainer in terms of commercial returns. Let's leave the other. But if you look at the commercial returns, because remember, it's a postage stamp, right? You get maybe, it's a postage stamp on your time and everything. So, or you can even do ones that are reduced from postage, but based on the length or the distance of your thing, of your time. But the main thing is that we need to export power. That is the only way generation.
I agree with you. You're spot on that. But obviously, if you go back to what you talked about earlier in terms of offtake, who are the off-takers? Can they pay for it? You also have those issues around the West African power pool in terms of the countries, the customers. Can they pay for it? So again, there's a lot of studies that need to go into that to establish affordability and how you incorporate the cost of building this grid, transmission grid across the regions to facilitate trade. But certainly that's the way to go, and I believe that the new administration will help to facilitate this happening. The last question from participants, because we've gone over our time, is for you, Ugo, and this is from Collins Akumabo. He says, let me try and put it up. I don't know if you can see it. It says, as a startup company in Lagos, what opportunities are available for collaboration in view of supplying generated electricity to IE? I mean, someone is interested in supplying you power.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. So unlike, Gencos that are encroaching into our business, we welcome, without our consent, we do welcome companies who want to generate power within our network. Currently, we're speaking to, I think we're partnering with almost a dozen different power developers in the mini grid space, in the embedded energy space as well. We're even speaking to some in the captive space as well, so that we can maybe buy their power and feed into the grid. So there are opportunities available. All you need to do is send us, contact us officially, and then with your proposal, and then we'll invite you in and also share a few information with you, maybe around the network that you're in, or where we think we need power, and then you can go in there, do your survey, and then we'll start business. So we're actually very eager. Eket Electric has at least, I think, 100 to 150 megawatts target of off-grid power over the next 3 to 5 years. And so there's a lot of work going towards achieving that target. So we welcome anyone, like I said, whether it's renewables or whether it's gas power, whichever one, we are willing to speak to them. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, participants, for those questions you posted. Last question for me before we go, 7 minutes over our time. And this is to all participants to give your closing remarks. Some of the key economic policies of the new administration, I think, of course, Kolapo touched on one of it, includes electricity generation, transmission, and distribution to be doubled, with state government encouraged to take part. That was one of the key economic policies of the new administration. The second one was mandate CBN to achieve a unified exchange rate, which Kolapo was speaking to earlier. Interest rates are too high and anti-business, and there's and he also referenced the fact that all anti-investment and multiple tax policies will be reviewed. These are some of the key economic policies of the new administration. I guess for me, will these policies, looking at the generation section, looking at the distribution, and looking at off-grid space, will these policies implemented be a game changer for the Nigeria electricity supply industry? I would like a minute or two for each one of you, and please wrap up your comments by mentioning 1 or 2 key actions that you would advise the new administration to prioritize for power sector. If you look at the power sector, there are so many things that can be that should be done. I mean, we are all very positive in our conversation today, which is very good, but there's so much that needs to be done, and we know that there's no one government that can do it all. So if you had the opportunity to speak to the new administration, mention 1 or 2 key actions that you feel that they should prioritize in helping to develop and address challenges that some of which we have talked about in this. So Onyinye, I would like you to go first, and then the others will follow.
Okay, thank you very much. All the initiatives you mentioned sound fantastic on paper. If we have a unified exchange rate, if we're actively working to reduce the barriers in the market, that would be very useful. Like Kolapo mentioned, in all our financial models, we have 2 exchange rates because you want to, hedge all the risks. And then usually explaining that alone to a foreign investor, it's usually, it's a battle itself. It's one full session just for them to understand the Forex in Nigeria. And usually, for the people that are not socially inclined, that's always a no. Like, it's a big risk. So having that solved alone will go a long way. Whatever number we end up at is fine, but at least let's know that it's stable and it can drive the market. Same with interest rate. If the interest rate is still too high, so having that stable and stable for a long period, for over the investment horizon, it would definitely push the sector. In terms of the key initiatives that we think we need to be put in place by this new administration, like I said earlier, just more confidence in the mini grid space, extending this our subsidy program, and even further increasing it. I know the World Bank is doing a lot in that space. It's called DES. There's a new 750 million portfolio that's supposed to come in if signed in by the new administration. So, I want to believe I speak on behalf of all the developers. We're ready to provide whatever documentation and support that is needed to push that conversation to make sure that we have that new portfolio that would significantly help the energy access space. And then I think I want to say, if we can start having policies in place that would encourage local manufacturing, it will also go a long way, because it will open up the market. There'll be job creation, there'll be capacity building, because every little thing that we use in our sector today, well, not everything, but a good percentage of what we use is imported. Now, if we almost similar to what has happened in MAP. I know that MAP did not fully, there's still a lot of work to be done, but at least we have meter manufacturing companies, more than 2 now in Nigeria. It used to be 2 before MAP, to the best of my knowledge. So something similar that will engender local manufacturing of these equipment would also go a long way to open up the sector. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Omoyinye. To you, Ugo. So what are your thoughts and just closing remarks on these economic policies?
All right, thanks. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, yes, we can.
So there's a lot that needs to be done. I'll try and summarize them as quickly as I can. I think the first thing that, at least let me speak from the point of view of the DisCos, we need a mechanism to fix the balance sheets of some of the DisCos so that they can attract the right level of investments that we need for the power sector. We've seen this happen in the banking sector. The CBN has done this a few times, and a lot of those banks have turned out much better. So, someone needs to come up with a mechanism that would help fix, some of the challenges that the DisCos have with the balance sheet, which were also caused by the government as well, and then have them, being attractive, for investment. Then I think we also need a market-driven NESI. I think NESI should find ways to depart from setting this and setting that and fixing this and fixing that, whether it's as losses or freezing tariffs and all that stuff. I think we just have to find a way of getting rid of that, and then replacing that with a market-driven NESI, fully armed with accountability. There are other ways of getting DisCos or GenCos or the transmission or TCN accountable without setting all sorts of things for them. Today we said gas prices, we said tariffs, we said this, we said loss. So you can actually, avoid setting those things and allow the market dictate responsibility while you have a way of, in tracking accountability. And then I think transmission also needs adequate attention because no matter what is generated from the GenCo side, you still need transmission, to wield that power. And for us as well at the DisCo end, when we're doing our 5-year plan, we can't do it in isolation with what is available or upstream, right? And what the transmission company is also able to wield. As much as we are also looking inward and tilting towards off-grid power, we still do need transmission. I don't think there's any developed economy in the world today that doesn't rely heavily on transmission and grid network for expansion and for scale. So we do need to see this significant level of investment on the transmission side and responsibility as well there. And then finally, Rahila, I think the new government needs to have what I'll call a coordinated strategy to resuscitate the power sector in Nigeria. I think it has to be fully coordinated. And what I mean by fully coordinated is this is not just the responsibility of Ministry of Power alone, or maybe some power presidential advisory committee or whatever. this is an entire sector that needs full attention of the government, from the way taxes are being charged, from the way power sector equipments are being cleared at the ports, building local capacities so that we can manufacture some of our equipment ourselves, creating standards. I'll give you an example, right? Metering today, the meters you have today, particularly the prepaid metering, came from South Africa. It's their entire design, right? Designed bespoke for their country. We just adopted it. So we need to start to have things like that. What sort of transformers we want to see in Nigeria? What sort of standards?
Yeah.
To be importing transformers from all over the world, or do we want transformers that are well suited for our market that people can't just bypass, or people can't just vandalize? What sort of meters do we want that is just adequate for our kind of network? What sort of conductors we want to see? So there needs to be a coordinated strategy. It could be over 5 years with clear implementation guidelines for how these things will work. So those, I think, are my own pain points, and I hope that maybe there's someone listening and we do have what it takes to implement most of them, Raila. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ugo. And Kola, you get the closing. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for that privilege. I'll look at just 2 or 3 things. I think the first is they have to find a way to reduce the link between the exchange rate and our tariffs. I know it's a hard task, but that's the only way they can reduce the pressure on the tariff being escalated so much. And if they have to say, maybe because of the reduced link, only 40% of the tariff can escalate in terms of dollar terms of 60%. But I think looking at it on a global structure, I think they need to find a way to delink it as much as possible. And that has a couple of things. For example, our concession payments for hydros are tied to a dollar-based, right? Even though we can pay Naira at the official exchange rate, but they're dollar-based. And you're saying you want to, so that's a huge challenge. They need to do that, because at that point we now argue on that. But capex, for example, should always be in dollars. But I think they need to do that. The second point is I think Ugo touched on this: transparency. Continue with this, the process they've taken in this bilateral contracting, phasing out of embeds, increasing accountability. The escrow needs to continue. Holding the discourse to accountability needs to go on. MO needs to wield the big stick. Those things need to continue to happen. And the last point, which I mentioned, I still think the government needs to focus on also seeing how we can export our power on a bankable basis, because that taxes, that gives more income for the government, creates more employment locally, and so on and so forth. So I think that's something, a huge revenue side that the government can explore very, very, very quickly. And they have 4 years in the first house, or maybe 8 years if they are re-elected. So I think those are the 3 big issues for me. I'd like to
fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Olapo, Ugo, and Onye. It has been a fantastic discussion today, very insightful. More importantly, what I really liked about the entire discussion is the fact that we talked about a lot of positives. So on the account of all that has been discussed and your contributions today, I certainly would like to express my optimism for the future of Nigeria's power sector. Although the challenges are notable and we've discussed some of them, we can pave the way for a brighter and more prosperous energy landscape through collaboration, a renewed focus on sustainable solutions, some of that we've touched on here, and a commitment, more importantly, a commitment to transparent and accountable governance. So on that note, I would like to thank the 3 of you for joining us, and all our participants online that took out time from their busy schedules to join us this day. We look forward to witnessing the transformative progress that lies ahead under the new dispensation. And we believe that with what we have achieved so far, given all that was talked about at this webinar today, the new administration will leverage on that, use it as a building block to greater things for us in this sector. So again, thank you very much, Kolapo, Ugo, and Onye. I hope to see you some other time on other topics in the nearest future, and have a very, very good day. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So, thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.